You're listening to the BCTLE podcast, a resource made possible by the Beatty Center for Teaching and Learning Excellence at Taylor University. I'm your host, Timothy Berkey. One of the things that we know about great teachers is that they develop relationships with their students in a way that creates better opportunities for learning to take place. At Taylor, the centrality of our relationship with Christ paints this relationship that we develop with our students in a different light than I think we might see at other institutions. But for those of us who maybe are a little bit more private or introverted, this idea of developing very close personal relationships with students might feel challenging. I know personally, I struggled when I first came to Taylor at knowing what was appropriate and what I was comfortable with might not always be the same thing. There are things that are appropriate here at Taylor that I don't know, maybe it was my personality or my background, but I wasn't quite sure that was for me. It's important that we foster community in our classrooms as intentionally as we are fostering community in our dorms. Because what our students are here to do is not just to develop spiritually and socially and to gain a wider array of cultural experiences, though that is important. We are an institution of higher education, and it's important that we create opportunities for community to take place and be seen as relevant in our disciplines. As I have spent time thinking about how to do this well in the foundational core classrooms as well as in my program, I heard about one of our colleagues on campus who has dedicated a significant amount of her time here at Taylor to fostering this community. My guest today is Dr. Tricia Stan. Tricia is an associate professor of chemistry, and when she first started at Taylor, she found herself as one of the only women on faculty in her department. And she noticed her students, specifically her women students, struggling with their place, their fit in a male-dominated department. And this recognition was the driving force behind starting a group to provide community for women in chemistry. And what started as an effort to increase the relationship and connections with her women students has grown to something that she couldn't have imagined when she started. Not only has it opened up the door for future relationships after commencement, it has also led to new and exciting connections, careers, and mentoring relationships with her students. If you find yourself in a position of wanting to develop stronger relationships with your students, mentoring your students, retaining students who might not see great representation in their discipline, I want to invite you into my conversation with Dr. Tricia Stan. Tricia, welcome to the BCTLE podcast.
Thank you.
So last week at the BCTLE, we heard your session on mentoring women in chemistry. And you talked about this idea related to, it's connected to this idea of fostering community amongst your students. It's the idea of mentorship sort of gives it a more professional tone. And you talked about how when you started here in the chemistry department that you were one of the only women in the department? Were you the only?
Yes, I was the only woman. So before I joined the department, it was an all-male department.
All-male department. So you joined the team, and you noticed that there are few women in students in the department, and they seem to be struggling a little bit with making some connections and performing in a class. You step into this space, male-dominated space, where your students are mostly men, and you start mentoring the women in your class. What I'm left with when I hear about that is, how did that idea sort of come to you of creating this community for your students? I wondered if you had seen that modeled somewhere else, if you had been the beneficiary of something like that, or if you just saw sort of an alignment with the community here at Taylor.
I think I kind of fell into it. I had a chemistry professor when I was in college that took an interest in me. It was a male professor, so I don't think it's really necessarily the female thing. Mm-hmm. But when I came to the department as being the only female and a big class, the entry-level class, our college chemistry class, has, I would say that's about half and half, mm-hmm. Half men, half women, just doing a variety of different things from a variety of different majors. But as far as chemistry majors, there were fewer women, and mm-hmm. there's lots of reasons for that. I don't know if I would attribute it all to that chemistry is a male-dominated field. I think that's making it way too simple. Mm-hmm. But when I came and I started, especially when I became full-time, because I started part-time, and when I became a full-time faculty member, just, we had women that were leaving the major because just some undefined reasons, usually when I talk to them. Oh, it may not, they didn't say it was too hard, but there was just that, what's going on here? And so I thought, well, maybe if I get them together, if they know that they're not the only one, because that came out sometimes. And I think that might be a generalized personality trait, that sometimes men function a little more independently or better with functioning independently, where women are more comfortable in a group. Not always true, but there is some of that. And so I just thought, well, maybe I can get them together and they can know who each other is, because I knew there was more than one, because I would get the class list, right? But they didn't always know who the other ones were. And so it kind of started with getting them together and trying to retain some of these that were just kind of feeling like, well, this isn't for me, or I don't see myself in this. And, I reached out to my sphere of influence. Mm-hmm. I had some influence with these women because they, we connected. We had things in common. We were both women in this chemistry department. And so that just kind of naturally led into getting them together. Mm-hmm. And then once I had them together, you found that, oh, they have questions about this, or they have questions about that. And I had answers to some of those questions because I had lived that. Yeah. And so, lived experience of being a chemistry major and going to graduate school, I had answers to some of the things that they had questions about, as well as just general, chemistry questions about what can you do with it? What were my friends from graduate school? What were my friends from undergraduate doing? And so I had some of those answers. And so it kind of fell into the let's explore, let's see if we can make these women more comfortable, into, well, I have answers to some of the questions they have, which is kind of the definition of mentorship, right? That we walk this path together and share some knowledge that maybe I have that they're still getting. And so I think it kind of turned into the mentorship rather than starting as a mentorship.
That's really interesting. I was just thinking about, it sounds in the early days very relationally oriented, making connections, maybe, a chemistry question here or there, but sort of helping them get connected. And in that process, it sounds like the less sort of structured turned into, did it really turn into more structure? I recall from your session that you don't set an agenda for these conversations, for these meetings.
Right. I have tried to set some agendas, and it just usually doesn't work out.
Okay. Yeah.
And so, we went to, so I guess less structured as far as the meetings, maybe more structured as far as my intentionality about looking for the things that I perceive as needs in the group and things that I could do to encourage or that would bring them together. So maybe that's a little misleading when I say less structured. The time is less structured, but maybe my intentions and what I'm trying to do with it has become more structured and more of where can I mentor, where can I add value to what's happening here on campus, to the relationships that they already might have.
Yeah, you mentioned the needs, the more structure around the needs. What are some of those needs that you've learned your students, particularly the women in chemistry? What are some of those needs? What does that look like?
So some of the needs are related to what's next and what do I do with chemistry and how do I decide? And so that's always a big need, because you always have some that come in and know from day one, I'm pre-med, I want to go to med school, that's what I want to do. But then there's also a whole other group that I like science and I think I like chemistry more, but I'm not even sure about that. And then I'm not sure what I can do with a chemistry major. Where do I go from here?
Yeah.
And so that's an ongoing need of, how do you sort that out? How do you start to figure out what area of chemistry you want to be in? That it's okay not to like all of them, because often I'll get student men and women that, I didn't do so well in X chemistry course. Right. Maybe I shouldn't be a chemistry major. It's like, no, we all have our specialties. Like the 5 of us in the hall all have specialties because we liked one area more than the others. And so it's okay. Like not all of us did equally well in all areas of chemistry. We usually end up where we were better at or had more skill at or more interest. And so just reminding them that they don't have to like every chemistry class they take. They can, and there's been tears in my office about that, just I don't like whatever.
Fill in the blank. Yeah.
And it's just, we're different personalities. We all have different likes and dislikes, and that's okay. So reminding them of that, and then just trying to enlighten them as to what the variety of things that they could do with a chemistry major, as well as talk to them about, okay, what else do you like? So, for instance, the one student that I mentioned that ended up in flavorings chemistry, just that she liked chemistry and coffee and ran into that person who did coffee chemistry, and so that opened a whole world for her and for me, because some of these are things that I didn't know about.
Sure.
And so it's just a willingness to learn with them of, well, let's see what we can find out there that incorporates your interests. And so
I love that sort of willingness to learn with them, that staying curious. Because I'm trying to think about all of the various spaces in my field, and I can't think of all of them. There are some that would surprise me as well. And there are times where I have a advisee in my office where we're talking about next steps, and sometimes I feel sort of limited as to how to coach, how to guide, because I haven't experienced all of those options, and I don't have such a vast network that I make connections there. What was the context of making that specific student, that coffee chemistry connection? What was the context around that? How did you get connected?
So that was part of the one Taylor parent that I coincidentally met and was talking to on a soccer trip. So my husband is a part of this. And he was with us on a soccer missions trip, and we were talking. He's like, well, I know these women that do this and this and this. Maybe I could set it up for you. And so he put me in contact with these women that were in chemistry fields, and I arranged it. They were looking to reach out. They were part of a business group that was women in business. And so they had some funds to reach out to high school and college age women to encourage them in, whatever business or in different majors that these women were in. And so we went up to see these women-owned businesses in Chicago, and one of them was a flavorings company. And one of them worked at Kraft Foods, who used some of those flavorings. And so it was at Kraft Foods, which was a bigger organization, and they gave their employees release time to do service projects. And so that's a neat thing. Everybody's out against, big companies, kind of like there is bad that happens, but there is also good.
Right.
And so being a large company, they could give employees time off to do some of these service projects. And the service project that this chemist chose to do was to help with roasting coffee in a third world country so that they could get better prices. And, it just had never crossed any of our minds really that, oh, wait, that's a chemistry thing, because it definitely is. There's a lot of chemistry in cooking and food. And so that was enough to spark an interest. And from there, we bought a book on coffee chemistry and talked to some people, and it just kind of started the ball rolling. So when she looked for graduate schools, she looked for a place that did flavorings and where she could extend that into coffee and among other things.
Sure.
And so it just really kind of took off from there. We explored from that one chance, but not chance, I'm sure, God ordained, meeting.
Right.
So
that willingness to be curious and stay open, even when it doesn't seem like it could have any real connection. I'm sure, when you said yes to this soccer missions trip, you weren't thinking, well, maybe I'll meet somebody who can make this connection. But But that's just the way these sort of connections work. That's interesting and exciting to think about, that those opportunities are all around us. Yeah. I imagine that chemistry as a field tends to skew male, especially historically. And when you mentioned, in here at Taylor, when you started, there were fewer women, but I think in a conversation that you and I were having, that you mentioned one of the byproducts of the mentoring women in chemistry is that the number of women who are joining your department as students is growing. What has that been like? What sort of culture? What gifts have you seen that bring to your team in chemistry?
Right. So I don't think it's all due to me. All right. So there are lots of things that go into which students we get here and which ones come.
So maybe a correlation.
Yeah, there's a correlation maybe there, and some of it I would take credit for, but certainly not all of it. Lots of things going on there. But the culture in our department, I think one of the nice things of this women more likely to be a group culture and want to have friends within the department and relationships there means that when we started the ACS club, we have a lot of women that, I'll join, I'll do that. When we have looked for volunteers to go to the Indianapolis Children's Museum to work with the chemistry day that they do there. We have a lot of women volunteers who do that. So I think there's been maybe an increase in those department-wide programs, things that we're doing. There are more of them just because of slightly different nature, personality. Not the, just let me get my work done and, I'm doing this individually, to the more group, brings some of that community aspect into our department. And so I do think we get greater participation at chemistry dinners or at chemistry events because we have that influx of women who want to be involved and want to be a part of this and want to reach out to the new ones coming in. So,
well, I was just thinking, I have to imagine that has to sort of have an impact on people wanting to come join the department. Prospective students have got to see that and go, this looks like a place to not just learn about chemistry, but to really find a community related to this as well.
Right. Yeah, because I'm, I have my office hour where I'm with them one day a week, but my senior chemistry majors and junior chemistry majors are with them every day in the dorm,
Sure.
And so there's several cases where we gained a chemistry major because one of my majors said to me, so-and-so is thinking about changing to chemistry, or so-and-so would like to know this. And so we've even gained majors that have already been on campus, but I probably wouldn't have known about had not one of my women said, so-and-so my dorm is interested. And then reaching out to those people has been very productive because usually it just takes a little encouragement. Right. At that point, if they're already thinking about it. And maybe they would have come anyway, but it doesn't hurt to reach out and say, hey, I'd like to have a conversation with you. Right. I can see you doing this. And I think just that faith in that they can do it, like that's lacking sometimes as college students in general and women in particular. Oh, this is hard. I can't do it. I should give up. And to have somebody there to speak into that and say, no, you're going to have bad days. I get it. I had them. You can make it through. Keep going. And just, being willing to admit, yep, it's hard and you're going to make it through and you're going to do fine. And
that belief is key. Last episode of the podcast, Angela Pacheco and I were talking about this idea of having a growth mindset about students, and the one student that it's particularly challenging to have a growth mindset about, the student who might be disengaged or the student who might have a less than positive attitude about our coursework, is probably the student who needs that belief the most. And the difference that can make is huge. It makes such an impact on not just their performance in the class, but more areas of their life than just their academic, their scholarly spaces.
I think it removes stress. When somebody believes in you, the stress level goes down, and then you can do the work that you're capable of. But if you feel like you're fighting all the time, that's hard.
That is such a great insight. I mean, I can think of times where that's been true in my own life. It's really hard to see the forest for the trees when I feel like I'm fighting. Yeah, absolutely. The impact that this group has on your students seems enormous. The stories that you mentioned in your session, whether it's the volunteering, the connections that they're making that are then paving the way for a career, the relational aspect, gaining wisdom and a safe space to discuss really challenging topics. I'm curious about the impact that you see play out after graduation. Do you see sort of the ripples of this, either personally or professionally, in your students, your women of chemistry after they leave? What does that look like?
I think, it's always hard to attribute what a future consequence to what's happening now. So that's a little tricky question, but I do keep in contact with them. So because there's that relationship, they feel free to come back and ask a question and will you write this recommendation? So sometimes in graduate school, there's a particular scholarship that they can apply for. And so we're getting notes back from students, myself as well as my male colleagues. We're getting notes back like, would you write me a recommendation for this, even though they've gone on to graduate school? It's just the nature of, we have a better understanding of them as people and their work ethic than the new place that they're at. So they've only maybe been there 6 months, but we've seen them for 4 years. Yeah. So we get asked to write some of that. So I think some of that is coming back, but just I tell them, hey, if you're having a bad day or something, or if you're thinking about dropping out of graduate school, call me, write me, whatever. I want to talk to you first. And so just the knowing that there's somebody still cheering for them. Yeah. And, we get invited to thesis defenses. That's especially great. Since they've been virtual. Sure. When they were in person, that wasn't happening because they're all over the country. But when they've been virtual, we've been to several thesis defenses. And just as they go on, they come back and they say hello. And I think taking interest in people always has benefits. So when I ran the finance course for the 8 to 10 women that were interested, I had I got from the alumni relations, the female chemistry majors that had graduated from here. And I just thought, because part of that was, if you complete the 6 weeks of the course, you get $100 to invest. And so there were ways that I could make that happen. But I thought, I'm going to reach out to the network, because by then I had graduated quite a few women in chemistry. And because we were doing it in that space, I knew at least those would understand what was happening. I was like, hey, is anybody willing to help me support this, to raise the funds so that they have that money to invest? And I got responses from people that I didn't know that are like, I am so glad that you're doing this. And I am so thrilled to hear what was going on in chemistry. And so I had told them, whether they could support or not, to just, drop me a note if you had a prayer request. And then I'll send a follow-up. And both from the initial one, I was able to raise the funds from them. I had people that were very interested, and it also built my network, like people that were like, well, if you have any of this type of chemistry major, please have them contact me. I'm willing to be, a resource for them. So that was a positive outcome. But then just ones that wrote, oh, it's so nice that my school cares what's going on in my life, and that somebody would, ask for a prayer request. And so it just, it extended that network out to the women. So it's really hard to say, again, where that mentorship and what kind of impact that it's having afterwards. But they're still hearing from me once in a while. They're still, connected. They know for sure that anytime they're in the area, I want them to come back to Women of Chemistry and talk about what they're doing. And usually they're excited to do that. Now, they're not here that often, but I think it's ongoing that they know that there's somebody here that cares and would support them. And sometimes I get a phone call, but I get life updates like, hey, you said you like to have life updates. And so I get those, and respond to those. So I still speaking into their lives in graduate school. And I suspect that sometimes I get life updates when they need to hear an encouraging word. Don't know, but suspect.
Yeah. Well, it makes me think about the reality that that the impact that the people who have cared for us over the years that has, that even years later, how important their voice, their words are to us as the people who have benefited from those mentor relationships. That I think when I think about mentoring students, I often think about the need for maybe more formal structure, and that's maybe my sort of systems approach coming out, but the just being present can be enough.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's not a one size fits all model. And, I think there are places for mentoring that's more specific, that's more, like you said, the systems approach. If there's a particular goal in mind, but at the age that we have students here right now, my goal is for them to graduate from here and go and live their best life. Go and have a productive life. And that really touches on so many things and not just whatever their major is. So for me, asking them, have you found a church yet? And what are you doing about that? When they go out from here, are you making friends? What are you doing? How are you fitting in at work? Just how are they generally?
Right.
Questions help prompt them to, because they know, they've been around. I've been around long enough. They know those questions are coming.
Right.
And so I think that's a little bit of a motivating factor. Dr. Stan is probably going to ask. So maybe I should go to church this Sunday, or, that more general mentoring, I think, and overflows into the chemistry, but it's somewhat a more general. And so I think there's different models that are going to work, and it depends on the application. And my application is to see them happy and thriving after here. And so the more general model and less, just waiting to see what the needs are kind of works well.
Well, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about faith integration and where we see this playing itself out in chemistry.
Okay.
Today's new faculty voice is Dr. Laura Gerig. Laura teaches in the psychology department, and you can find her over in Ayers. I actually had a chance to bump into Laura at the latest faculty meeting, and her experience in higher education is such a blessing to our students, some of whom happen to be her family. If you have a chance, I encourage you to stop by Ayers and get to know Laura. Send her a note, her card, let her know that you're glad that she's here. We are blessed to have Dr. Laura Gerig as one of our new faculty voices.
I love the relationships that I get to build with students through doing that. I love the conversations that happen there. I love seeing students take what seems like some pretty dry theory or something like that and be able to apply it and use it in a meaningful way in their careers, in their personal lives, in their relationships with the Lord. So I love seeing that growth process. For me, my faith is the core of my life. It's the priority and the most important thing. So anything that I do, and if teaching is my career where I'm going to be spending a lot of time, I feel like My faith obviously not only influences that, but those other things in my life need to be used as a way to not only help me grow, but to help me minister to others. And so I feel like that's kind of where God has called me to be. So in psychology, obviously, the general field of psychology is not a Christian discipline specifically, and is pretty broad in a lot of different worldviews and a lot of different perspectives. And so I like to be able to look at all of those things. There's not really anything in psychology that I feel like I'm afraid to study and explore and look at, but to be able to do that and say, now, how does that line up with what Scripture teaches us? How does that line up with what we know about how God created us and what He created us for? And then what does that look like in daily life? That's what I try to strive to do as I study and as I help students do that too.
So where is your home in your discipline?
So my degree is actually in school psychology, and I have a cognate in neuropsychology. And so I like the assessment part, developmental psych, those kinds of areas are probably the core places. I knew I didn't necessarily want to go into counseling, and I wasn't exactly sure what else initially you did with psychology, and really kind of found this niche that fits.
Do you find many students find themselves in that position of they know what psychology looks at, but they're not sure what's open to them with a degree in psychology?
Yes, I think that happens a lot. I think that we do tend to think mostly of a counseling or a clinical psychology as the primary areas, and it's so broad, and there are so many things that you can do with it. So I think a lot of students come in and they say, I really enjoyed my intro to psych class, but I don't know what I want to do with that. And so it's kind of fun to be able to say there are so many different ways that God could use that.
So outside of the classroom, outside of research, what do you spend your time doing? What excites you?
Most of my time outside of that is spent with my family. So I'm married. My husband's name is Gerig. He's a tennis coach and instructor. We live in Fort Wayne, and we have 4 kids. And so I have 2 daughters that are actually students here at Taylor. And then I have 2 sons that are starting their freshman and senior years of high school. So most of my life outside of this is spent following them around to activities and the things that they're in, and working on helping them make next steps in life.
So your daughters who are students here, how do they feel about mom being a professor?
That's a great question. So when I started even looking at this position, and one of my daughters, who actually is a psychology major, is the one who told me and and said, "Hey, just so you know." And so I had conversations with both of them, and I said, this has to be completely open and honest. Now is your chance. If this is going to be a problem, if you don't want me to do this, you need to tell me up front. And both of them said, no, we completely support you in that.
That's great.
My other daughter is a music education major, and so I think our paths won't necessarily cross a lot on campus unless we want that to happen, and hopefully she'll want that to happen. So I think the big draw in my office is going to be, she said, you will have your Gerig in your office, right? So I said, sure, come by and get coffee.
So what excites you about coming back to Taylor? What are you really looking forward to this year?
I think it sounds very kind of canned, but it feels very much like home. For me, when I was a student at Taylor, that was probably one of the biggest times of spiritual growth in my life. And so for me, there's just a feel of connection with that. And I'm excited about the opportunity to continue to just hopefully pour into Taylor students and give them that opportunity as well to grow more. I like the solid faith foundation that I think the university has, and I'm excited to just be a part of that again.
Tricia, you mentioned that, and we've been talking about it a little bit, that you're finding that for your students and your style, that less structure is more, that setting an agenda for your office visits hasn't really shown much effectiveness at creating those relationships and developing mentorships with students. However, you also said in the session that it was in these office visits the less structured, that you found some of these sort of divine appointments where no one's coming to your office and then suddenly someone's there and it's very clear this is a God moment where you need to talk to this student. I wonder, was discipleship on your radar when you started this Women in Chemistry group?
I would say no. That that's more something that's grown as you see a need, and just thinking about my own experiences again. It made it very comfortable. One day, it's like, well, they were asking me about graduate school and maybe some of the things that I wished, and I was like, yeah, I wish that I had really been more prepared to share my faith. And it wasn't talked about as much, and just how do we go about doing that? Yeah. And conversationally like that, they were very interested. Like, yeah, I'm going off to graduate school next year. What am I going to face? How do I navigate that? And not that I have answers, but I certainly have thoughts of, this is where I was maybe well prepared, and this is where I wasn't as well prepared, and this is what I would think about doing now. And so part of that is my own faith journey and how I've grown and how God has grown me, and just being willing to share that, so kind of the time-honored, in any Christian circle of, you learn and you grow and you share that with others and you grow from each other. And so being really open with them about, I think these are conversations that I had that were faith-based in graduate school, or these are ways that I've seen God work in my life as a chemist and how it overlapped with my faith. And ways that I can see maybe, I missed that opportunity. I could have said, or I could have done. And so some things that have been formative for me, and thinking about, how do I go about reaching people? I'm a chemist, so what does that mean? What advantage does that give me? And certainly with other chemists or other scientists, the fact that I have a PhD in chemistry buys me some credibility, and maybe gives me an opportunity to say, well, no, I believe there is a God, and here's why, and here's where I see that. And so, it's more subtle than you would think, but sometimes it's more direct too. Just, God opens the doors, and being willing to take those. And, sometimes I have, and sometimes I've missed it.
Sure.
And I think that's good for our students to hear, that it's a progress, it's a journey. You're not perfect at it. But if you start thinking about it and looking for those open doors, there will be more doors.
Yeah, absolutely. Was Taylor one of those doors for you coming here, that was just clear, this is the door that God wants me to walk through?
No.
No?
No. So we moved to Indiana because of my husband's job.
Okay.
And so I was looking around for jobs in the area, and he was at another institution, and they're like, well, here are the institutions in the area that you could write to and see if they have any need of chemistry. And so Taylor had a need, and I was able to do that part-time for a while. And then that's a whole other story of how we both ended up at Taylor and in full-time positions. But I think maybe that's part of my personality and who I am. I'm not the type that gets a dream that says, yep, this is where you're supposed to be. Yeah. But I'm a more logical progression. And so it was an open door. It seemed like a good fit. So I came, and then as I was here, saw that, this is, God is using me, and this is a place that I can flourish and grow. And, so kind of revealed as I went along, as opposed to
Yeah.
one big, oh yeah, this is where you should be.
I have to imagine that story can be reassuring to students. I'm thinking right now of a particular kind of student that I see every now and then who is so certain of the neck they have. It reminds me of the movie It's a Wonderful Life, where George Bailey says, I know what I'm going to do today and tomorrow and the day after that, where these students sort of have everything planned out to a T, and they have such certainty with exactly what they are meant to be doing, their calling. I didn't feel that way at all. I still don't feel that way. And I have to imagine that hearing that from a faculty member, that I move in trust and wisdom when things come up, but I don't know for certain what my career calling might be. I have to imagine for some of our students that can be very reassuring.
Yeah. It's a process to get to the point where when you don't have a definite word that says this is what you should be and this is where you should be and what you should be doing. Yeah. And there's a lot of uncertainty in that. And yet, as you look back, you see where God has worked and how he's used you. And you just come to realize that he doesn't reveal the same things in the same way to all of us. And it's not that one is right and one is wrong. But it's been a process for me, so I'm certainly glad to share that with students. Yeah. And yeah, I do think that some of them have been relieved, like that I didn't know from day one that this is what I wanted to do and where I wanted to be, and that was okay. And you're not tied to a thing just because, I think this is where God wants me to go, and so I have to do that for the next 70 years. It's like, no, you can try something and then God might redirect you. Yeah. And also just always remembering that God gives us likes and dislikes. Those are from God. And so if you don't like something, that's okay. Yeah. You don't have to do that. God is usually not telling us that we have to do something we dislike. He gives us likes to give us a little direction of where he can use us and what he'd like to see us do. So
I love that. There's something about the way that discipleship is done here at Taylor that it is born out of honesty and vulnerability, and that is so awesome to be a part of. There are lots of forms that sort of faith integration takes on campus, and one of the red threads in this podcast is learning a little bit about what faith integration looks like in the various disciplines and specialties and classrooms across campus. So I would love to hear a little bit about what faith integration looks like for you.
I think faith integration is more that my faith is part of who I am and how I live. And so it's not so much of I'm bringing my faith into my classroom, but it's more that I'm bringing my faith into how I live my everyday life. And the more I do that, the more it shows up in my classroom because it's part of who I am. And so there are some moments that I can point to in my life when it's like, oh, this really clicked with me. And one of those was a church study that we did where it was called Just Walk Across the Room. And I understand there's some baggage with the author of that now, but that doesn't make it any less true.
Sure.
And so when we did that study at church, it really was like, oh, I don't have to be an evangelist. I don't have to go through the Roman road with, look for every opportunity to go through the Roman road with people. I have to take an interest in people that God puts in my life and be willing to share my life with them is kind of really boiled down really small what I got out of that. And that just, the tradition that I grew up with was, you should be out there knocking on doors and sharing the gospel. And that was just not me. And this was like, oh, I can do this. I can reach the people that are hurting in my sphere of influence, because everybody has a problem at some point in their life. And that's the point when they need God and they're maybe open to hearing about God. So I don't have to force it. I just have to live my life, who I am, who God made me, but always be looking for those opportunities to show God's love, to do that, go that extra mile for that person, or do that thing. And so really that's how I try to bring the faith integration into my classroom, is to just say, hey, this is where I see God, like this chemistry thing. So water is an example, and there are details about water that we talk about in class. And it's like, do you realize that if water weren't shaped this way, all of these things that water does wouldn't be true? And that's one of the places that I see God as a creator. Like, that just doesn't happen. That had to be designed. Like, it just didn't happen that that molecule is that way. And so I see God in that. And I see God in how we apply our science. And so just trying to bring those thoughts. And as you think about those, God brings more thoughts to your mind to share. But try to share those thoughts of, hey, I take my science and I take my faith, and my faith informs the way I apply my science and how I discuss that with others, because there's contentious issues in science and in any field of study, I would imagine. And so how do we look at that? How do we look at people who are on the other side of this issue? How do we express our opinions? And there's a way to bring faith into that. And so just trying to always look for those openings to reach out to students and say, well, this is how I see God, or this is where I see how I can apply my faith. And it's more that daily walk of just walk over and introduce yourself to a person and get to know them and ask them about what they think. And then they're probably going to ask you about what you think. And that gives you the opening. So it's not forcing it on somebody. It's more providing the opportunity for them to ask you a question that will allow you to then say, well, let me tell you about why I do this, or, what I see in this. Because then it feels natural because they've asked you a question.
Sure.
And so we can all get better at setting up those questions by knowing the person we're talking to, by asking them questions, by being involved in their life. And so really for me, faith integration in the classroom, applies to chemistry because I do chemistry, but it more applies to my life and this idea of, if I'm willing to invest in other people's lives and find out about them, they're going to want to know about me. And there's no way I can share about me without sharing about God. And so it just becomes a natural extension of who I am.
Yeah. I hear in that two things, really. The idea of just being willing to be curious about others and create a space where that curiosity can grow. Sounds a lot like the women in chemistry group. I see a very clear connection between those two, and it's not surprising to me to see where that came from. But the other thing that I hear that is really interesting to me is you said I do chemistry, and so my faith is there too because I'm there. I think it's so easy to misplace our identity as academics in our field, in our study, and to really let that own a big chunk of who we are. But I don't hear that in your voice, in the way you talk about your faith integrating. You are you just happen to do chemistry. Where did that confidence, I'll call it, in that identity, in that separation from it being tied to what you do, where did that come from?
That's a good question. And I really think that's something that's grown over the years. I wouldn't say that I was always that confident of that. Again, I point to that study as being a turning point. Like, there was a huge impact on my life, and just I don't have to go and do something. I have to be who God made me to be. And that was just such a tremendous release of pressure on me spiritually, in my spiritual life, that was a good thing. But it's something that I've grown into. And I would say one of the benefits of growing older, there are lots of things that aren't, but one of the benefits of growing older is you just like, no, it is okay. And God does want me here. And I don't have to be that other person. I can be who I am. And so I think it's been a real process of getting to that place. And I still need reminding, but having that track record and looking back and seeing the points in your life where God has done something and realized that, it's Him working through who I am and through what I'm already doing, that it just helps you to realize, I don't have to change, or I don't have to be something that I'm not. It's the other way around. And that's, I guess for me, that's sometimes faith integration, the way we talk about it here, it just seems backwards. It should come from who we are in Christ. And I'm a chemist, instead of I'm a chemist and I have to bring that, I have to start with that and then bring that into the faith integration. It's like, no, it comes from who I am and the way I live my life. And so, of course, it flows out into my chemistry, because that's who I am too. And so I'm not saying we do it wrong, but just, sometimes that perspective switch about how we try to do it, at least for me, was very helpful, and much more of what seems natural, and then therefore what other people see.
I am so grateful for the opportunity to not just get to know you better, but also to think about I'm sure we share students. I teach in the foundational core. I see almost every student on campus at some point in their 4 years. But to hear about the other spaces on campus that the students who are in my classroom right now are walking into, and to learn more about the heart behind that. I'm grateful to be a part of the same community as you, Tricia. Thanks so much for being a part of the conversation today.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for being a part of the conversation. If you're looking for more ways to get connected, you can always email us at bctlepodcast@taylor.edu. Let us know what you think about the episode, or maybe you're looking for more resources. Maybe you have an idea for the conversation we should tackle next. Shoot us an email. We would love to connect with you. At the BCTLE, our mission is to encourage and equip faculty in their calling as teachers, their care for students, and their designs for learning. We want you to know we appreciate you, and we see everything that you're doing for your students. We hope that this podcast can help you make Monday just a little bit better.